The 19 worst junk foods you could ever eat. And we're not talking about random stuff we've pulled off of Google. We're talking about what is legitimately hyperpalatable based upon some science. Here's what's wild. We don't eat lots of junk food because it tastes good. That's a misnomer. Just because something tastes good on the palate doesn't mean that we naturally want to eat more of it. There are different mechanisms, and there's a classic study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that illustrates this perfectly. So I have to get this educational part done first so you understand why these 19 foods are legitimately things you should avoid, and I'm not just throwing garbage at you. Okay, so this study took a look at subjects under what's called an fMRI scan, a functional MRI scan, and it gave them 4 different kinds of milkshakes, or 5 if you count the control. It gave them a high-fat, high-sugar milkshake, gave them a high-fat, low-sugar milkshake, a low-fat, high-sugar milkshake, and a low-fat, low-sugar milkshake, and then they gave them a control tasteless milkshake. All the milkshakes were the same amount of calories, okay? What they found here is that the groups that had more fat and less sugar had more activation in the hippocampal regions of the brain as far as just what was lighting up, like neuronal response. Also the inferior frontal gyrus, so different areas of the brain. Whereas the sugar seemed to light up the thalamus and different regions of the brain. Entirely separate. What they found is that fat activated and lit up the portion of the brain that is associated with sensation, texture, gratification. Like if you were to take like a piece of velvet and it's really soft, right? You get that sensation. Same kind of thing if something's like feels really good in your mouth. Okay, well then sugar lit up the more taste side, the more satisfaction, dopamine side. So when you combine these, it's terrible, right? There's not really a natural situation where you'd be combining these. Then you add salt into the mix, and salt can affect neuronal processing even more. Not always bad, but when you add it into the mix, but then even worse, you start adding in MSG and you start adding in yeast extract, and this isn't a hit piece on MSG and yeast extract, but the bottom line is those are there to make us feel like food is even better. It lights up our brain more. So without further ado, let's just get down to the list. Number 1 is gonna be Doritos. Doritos is one of the worst things. There's no particular order. Okay, you've got a high amount of fat, you've got tremendous texture. There are food scientists that make millions of dollars doing what they do because they're so good at it. Getting the texture, just the powder when it hits your mouth, just the texture of the powder on your hands and how you lick your fingers afterwards. That has an impact on your brain that keeps you coming back for more. Not to mention refined starch, not to mention the MSG. Next up is gonna be any kind of fried sweet food. So a funnel cake, a churro, a Twinkie is a perfect example. Why? Because you have the texture from the fat, the sugar. Those combinations, those are the bad ones. This next one is kind of a surprise. It's ramen. Okay, ramen is a very high glycemic, ultra refined noodle. There's usually a bunch of soybean oil and possibly even trans fat oils added into the mix. But then if you look at most ramen, there's what is called TBHQ in it. Now, more research needs to be done, but TBHQ could be associated with neuronal cell death and actual DNA damage. So very, very dangerous stuff to be playing with. I'm not saying if you eat ramen, your brain cells are gonna fall apart. Like that's not the case, but that is what I would consider a terrible junk food. Okay, something that's gonna keep you coming back for more and more and more. This next one is kind of funny. It's Fruit Loops. Now Fruit Loops don't really combine sugar and fat, but Fruit Loops are so high glycemic, and the problem that we have with them is the time of day we typically eat them. You roll out of bed and you have Fruit Loops and you're not having any protein along with it, right? So you have this big glycemic spike. Now, I'm gonna poke fun of my friend Lane Norton for a second. When I did a video with him, he told that he had Fruit Loops for breakfast, but what he did is he put protein powder in his milk. Okay, that's not the healthiest breakfast, but he did attenuate the glucose spike a little bit. So if you must have Fruit Loops, do something like Lane Norton, where you put some protein powder in your milk or something. Best thing that you can do is if you're going to have some high carbohydrate meal with breakfast, counter it with some meat. At least meat is going to counteract that glycemic spike significantly. So some good quality protein. Speaking of that, I put a link down below. They're a sponsor on this video, a special link for ButcherBox. So they have super good grass-fed, grass-finished beef. They have chicken, they have all kinds of seafood options. They even have smoked salmon options now, so you could have that for breakfast. Really cool options, really good priced, and it's the best tasting grass-fed meat that you'll probably ever have. And I'm not kidding, it's super good. Gets delivered to your doorstep, and you can choose your cuts, you can change your cuts every month. You can use that link and get free ground beef for life too, which is a special promo that they're running. So really cool stuff. Check them out. You don't have to go to the grocery store, it just gets delivered to your doorstep. And I'm telling you, if you don't have a ribeye for breakfast, then you're not living life. Number 5 is gonna be milkshakes, for kind of a reason you might not think. Sure, you have sugar and fat. We've established that to be not so good. But the delivery system, the fact that it's liquefied, this has a huge effect. When you have what are called gut incretins, gut hormones that register how quickly something's coming in, well, they send feedback to the brain to tell you to get full. When something comes in a liquid form like this, that's very high calorie, you have a minimal glucagon-like peptide, GLP-1 response. So very limited feedback to the brain to tell you to stop. So you could pound a 600, 700 calorie milkshake and not even have a blip on your radar of feeling full. Next up is white chocolate. I say this because although there's worse things out there than white chocolate, it's pure cocoa butter, cocoa mass, fat, and sugar. But Thomas, dark chocolate, you talk about dark chocolate all the time. Dark chocolate has polyphenols in it that actually counteract some of the sugar. Although it's not perfect, I don't think you should be eating like 65% dark chocolate with a bunch of sugar. Let's be real. You should be eating like 88 or 90%. The fact is that when you compare white chocolate to dark chocolate, there's no comparison. French fries. Okay, now here's the deal. French fries next to potato chips, I would arguably say that French fries are gonna be much more satiated. In fact, you might know Grego Gallagher, Kino Body. He talks about this all the time. He talks about how, although French fries aren't the healthiest food, he would rather eat French fries than potato chips because potato chips are just endless, right? French fries, you can actually get kind of full from them, but you gotta get around the fact that there's soybean oil, trans fats, high glycemic carbohydrates because of the way the potatoes are cooked. And next thing you know, you're just eating a ton of them. A lot of times there's also acrylamide in them too, which isn't exactly the healthiest thing for our neurons and for our cells in general for metabolic function. Ice cream, but I don't think I need to say a whole lot more. What about things like Halo Top or things that, Enlighten, these different lower sugar ice creams? They're better for sure, but you can still expect to light up your brain. Sweet things will still excite your brain. You'll still probably want to eat more. Although I will say, yes, getting rid of the sugar is probably a good start. This one's a little bit vague, but salty fried foods. Most fried foods are salty. So things like onion rings, things like fried chicken tenders, mozzarella sticks. The reason is when there's salt added to the equation, there's a study published in Nature that demonstrated that salt might impact our brain from a different angle. So they found that it could alter brain signaling, which means that if we have fat, we have sugar, and we have high salt, not just a little bit of salt, but high salt, we have multiple signals going to the brain. Remember, our brains are wired for survival. Salt is critical for survival. You put an animal out in the middle of a field and you put a salt lick out there, it's gonna find the salt to stay alive. It's critical, so our brain is wired to find salt. So think about the satisfaction response we get from salt, from sugar, and from fat, all in one sitting. Number 10 is flavored yogurt. Don't need to go into a lot of detail on this. Super thin, so it just digests really fast. It's pure sugar. Come on, it's not good stuff. At least go for straight up Greek yogurt. I'm a big yogurt guy, but go for Greek yogurt and put some stevia in it, or get one of those like Oikos zero sugar options or something like that. Number 11 is donuts for obvious reasons. Again, you're taking high amounts of refined carbs and you're frying them in cruddy oil, and then you're putting additional fats and you're making them as succulent as possible. So you're satisfying this entirely different region of your brain. Barbecue sauce. Okay, whoa, didn't expect that one coming. Don't get me wrong, there's healthier options for barbecue sauce. Primal Kitchen's got some good ones, things like that, they're out there. But we do need to look at the fact that most of them have a bunch of high fructose corn syrup. There is a study published in Nutrients that took a look at the effect of high fructose corn syrup on the brain. It was actually a review, so it looked at multiple studies. They found even in the short term, there was neuroinflammation and there were increases in oxidative stress. There were changes in the brain plasticity, and they actually were able to associate largely high fructose corn syrup with brain mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, this doesn't mean in just one serving, but relatively short term. So if you're finding a new barbecue sauce that you love at your local barbecue restaurant and you can't get enough of it, and you're going there every day for a couple of weeks, yeah, you could potentially have an issue. So just find a better option or use it sparingly. Number 13 is margarine, and this is on the list because honestly, it's pure trans fat. So independent of being hyperpalatable, it's just terrible for you. Number 14 is frozen pizza. The reason I say this is because if you go to a restaurant and you get a good quality pizza, yeah, you're gonna have refined starches, you're gonna have fats, but you're also gonna have some protein on it. You're typically going to have, if you get high quality pizza, it's a little bit better. You can also get sourdough crust some places. You can get gluten-free crust some places. But frozen pizzas, you really run into just bottom of the barrel, refined garbage, high fat, lower protein, a bunch of preservatives. It's just easy to cram your calories. Again, they put things in there to make it taste even better versus a made from scratch, good solid pizza. Number 15 is an interesting one. It's mayonnaise. And I put mayonnaise on there because it's not just about the mayonnaise. Like, mayonnaise could be a superfood. Like, it could definitely be a superfood if it's made with avocado oil or mac nut oil or whatever. But usually it's cruddy soybean oil, but that's not the issue. It's what we put mayonnaise on, right? We start putting mayonnaise on hot dogs, put mayonnaise on burgers. You see the drill here, right? We got high fat, super smooth, creamy texture that makes our brain feel good, and we smother it on bread. Number 16, probably one of the worst for me, one that I really have to watch out for, and that is nachos. Nachos are so calorically dense, plus you get the cheesy consistency. Now, I don't want to sound like a weirdo because it's small science, but there is some evidence out there that cheese can actually affect our opioid receptors as well. What this means is, at a small level, if you start eating lots of cheese, like you could easily put away with nachos, it does make you feel kind of euphoric. And you have that to add insult to injury. So you have the fat that kind of makes you feel good, you have the carbs, you have the refined starch, you have caloric density, and then you have kind of this potential opioid effect. It's just best to avoid them, or just go kind of easy on it, and definitely don't get the Velveeta weird mystery stuff. Number 17, hot dogs. Now, straight up beef frank is gonna be great. Like, Butcher Box has really good 100% beef hot dogs as well. Like, again, super awesome. But most of the hot dogs you're getting at the ballpark, they're not that. They're probably gonna be like 50% meat, and then it's gonna be on a refined bun. Again, you have very high fat, because those hot dogs are high fat, along with mayonnaise, along with whatever, probably high fructose corn syrup, ketchup. I don't want to sound like I'm just like bagging on all these foods, because I think any of these you could have in small amounts, but the reason they're the most dangerous junk foods is because they are ones that you will eat way too much of. Number 18 is going to be M&Ms and Skittles. The reason I say M&Ms is because you got the sugar, the fat, but you also have artificial colors in there. And there's some interesting studies. There was one study in particular in environmental health. It looked at adolescents, but it found that when they had yellow number 5 or red dye number 40, it actually was linked to more ADD and ADHD. We're starting to see more evidence coming out of this, and we're starting to see a lot of brands like moving away from these like yellow number 6, yellow number 5, red 40, all these stuff, because they're not exactly good, and they're kind of mystery compounds because they seem to light up the brain in other ways. So are they more addictive? Not necessarily. It's just doing something in the brain that's probably not the best. And number 19 is an interesting one, and that's going to be fake dark chocolate. Why do I say that? Because there's a lot of dark chocolates out there that aren't actually dark chocolate, or they're sugar-free chocolates that still have a bunch of maltitol and still have other binding agents. And when you eat them, you still have a major blood sugar spike, even though they're sugar-free. They still have a lot of carbs, they're gonna wreck your gut, and they're not a food that's going to satiate you. If you're going to have dark chocolate, go for something that, yes, is low sugar, or maybe a sugar-free option, but get one that is like 90% dark chocolate so you actually get the benefit as well. As always, keep it locked in here on my channel. See you tomorrow.